Hello. So today I decided I want to talk a bit about the process of my spiritual journey, the awakening, and kind of how things have gone for me. In a general sense, in some cases, but I will go into some details on certain aspects that I want to highlight today. And I'm going to use my astrology oracle to help prompt me along in the conversation. So thank you for joining me, for your interest. If you were drawn here, then the intention is that what I share will be something helpful for you, whether it be, just understanding someone else's perspective, or something you can resonate with, relate to, or something that you realize because of another perspective that is open to you, whatever it may be. So, let's see. The basic premise for what I want to talk about is just this power of love. And it's very interesting because before awakening, I understood love as like the thing that your mother does, like automatically your mother loves you. I never felt it, I just was told it. And I'm not saying that to put my mother down or anything like that. It was just my perception, my sensory experience of being on Earth in a human body was that, whatever this thing love was being, told to me as, was just what I took at face value. And I didn't have any associated feelings with it, although I do and always have felt things very deeply. And so that was curious to me, but nothing I could solve or even thought that I would have to solve. So I just went through life, And then, later I came to understand that one of my coping mechanisms for navigating life was that I was always searching for love and avoiding pain, which is very human, but it was like the whole goal of my days. And I couldn't focus on much else. And later came to understand that that was a sort of trauma response, a coping mechanism based around the trauma of being conditionally loved. And my parents didn't choose to conditionally love me. It's just that there are programs of relating on Earth that do perpetuate conditional love. Now, conditional love is just a concept and it's not real. But if it's something you perceive, then you proceed through life from a standpoint of something that feels like suffering because you feel like you're lacking. And that feeling of lack causes certain coping mechanisms to avoid that feeling because that feeling hurts, and that feeling is overwhelming, especially at the time that concept would have been adopted in early childhood. So these are just perspectives that we're trying on to have the human experience. So I want to say none of it's wrong, but from where I stand now, I can understand and see that I am loved, that I love me, that God loves me, that I'm never alone, and that love isn't what I thought it was at all. Love is just what I am. Love is the currency of the universe. Love is just presence. Love is being. That's what love is. So that means that when we're in resistance and when we're separated from being, that we don't feel love. And that means when we're in analysis, we don't feel love. That means when we're trying to survive in survival mode, we're not feeling love. Although love can also be thought of as surviving because it's required to feel it from this perspective. However, when we are out of this body, when we pass along from this vessel, this human vessel that we're using to navigate Earth, we are still in existence. We still are love. So really, love is bigger than the human experience and bigger than what we are. But at the point that I came to start expanding my awareness around the concept of love and what it was and what it was not, it was through pain. It was through my certain life experiences putting me in a position to feel pains that I had previously felt too overwhelmed to feel and had suppressed and denied and developed coping mechanisms to avoid. And part of the coping mechanisms that I developed was to always seek love and what I thought was love, and that was what was modeled to me from my parental figures. And so my mother, in a very basic general sense and without any malice, showing me what she learned, perpetuated the idea that love was something that you really need to earn, that you show people your value by doing for them, by being good, by being kind, by giving of yourself. People value what you give, and that's love. And my father showed me more of like intermittent attention or intermittent play, and when we weren't playing, and the play was usually very rough, and it was very something like hanging me from the door jamb by my fingertips, which put me in terror. Things like that were play to him, and that was very scary for me. But when he wasn't doing that, it was more like of an abandonment. It was like a neglect. It was like a get away from me. I need, peace. So that model of love was kind of love as abuse. Abuse being either outright playful abuse that was done in a, from his standpoint, that was fun for him. And he wasn't able to understand that for me that was terrifying, and it was a series of things like that. And it was just that, and at the other times, neglect was the way, or abandonment, meaning anything that I wanted was not important, or didn't seem important to him. He, of course, was suffering his own traumas and just passing that along to me. So he passed along the idea that love was scarce, that love was unattainable, that love was something that was given in breadcrumbs, and that it came with a bit of hurt. So these are the two kinds of love that I would be seeking out. And more so, I adopted the kind that my mother modeled, which was, pleasing others. And then when I woke up to the realization that I was not loving myself, and that loving myself was the answer to feeling better, because I was depressed and suicidal and anxious and unhappy, and to the degree that I couldn't really focus on day-to-day life or keeping a job, and I was having outbursts of rage when things happened. Mostly unexpected changes of plans would set me off, and to panic or rage or anxiety. It got real bad for me. I was eventually unable to leave my house without panic attacks and things like that. I shut down completely. And I was definitely attracted towards men who abandoned me, or made me try to earn their love, or, neglected me or abused me while I was with them, while I kept up the role of just trying to do the most to earn their love and be lovable enough. And of course, now I understand that was just a whole little coping mechanism playing out, so that I could eventually notice the pattern of it and see it for what it was. And when I did, I swung to the other extreme and stopped saying yes. I was no longer a people pleaser. I was I'm done with peopler. And I isolated myself completely and didn't leave my house. But then I did find that coping mechanism of still needing love and wanting love rose up. So I would use the internet to have like online relationships with people who would give me praise based on my beauty, or whatever it may be. I think I mostly would have relied on my looks back then, just taking the photo at the perfect angle to get myself to look the best I possibly could, and just all kinds of hoops that I was jumping through because I didn't understand that I was good enough. I felt a lack of self-esteem because that was what was modeled to me is from my parents. My mom was modeling that, I couldn't just be loved for who I am. I had to do something to be lovable. And my dad was modeling to me that I could do nothing to be lovable enough. So I didn't have a self-esteem, and I didn't understand what I understand now about myself, which is that I am lovable and I am loving, and that I'm allowed to fill up my own cup, and it's not selfish. And then from there I can give from my overflow, and it just naturally flows. But so I started untangling those kind of programs within myself, and of course it's like a Jenga tower, and there's layer after layer, and they all kind of weave into each other when it comes to these kind of coping mechanisms, because it's not like it just happened from one incident in childhood. My childhood home was very chaotic. There was physical abuse, there was, things being broken in the home, and fights over money, and not enough, and lies and manipulation, and a lot of fear kind of stuff being put into my program, because we are programmed up to the age of 7 with our environment. And so these were the things that I had to prepare to survive. So I was developing coping mechanisms, and what happened was the coping mechanisms that I developed were really poor coping mechanisms, meaning they didn't work when I got into adulthood. I was overwhelmed with the anxiety and the depression and the suicidal ideation that I couldn't keep up my role in society to work and go to school and be a mom and have a healthy relationship or anything like that. It was just not possible with the coping mechanisms I had developed. They crumbled. And it actually was a beautiful gift for me, because it put me into this isolation state where I was just by myself with myself. And eventually I could notice that I was always trying to seek somebody outside myself online to make me feel better. And so I would notice the pattern of that. And then it was like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. And then eventually I started seeking out real life people again. And then I noticed that I would spend about a month getting to know a guy, dating a guy, and I would really, really like him and think he was the one, because it was always under the guise that I was looking for the one. I thought there was just this one that I was going to be with. And that was maybe part of my coping mechanisms, because, my mom stayed with my dad because that was her one. And so I just thought, there's one for you, and that's the one you find, and then you're happily ever after. And I wanted that happily ever after, so I was looking for the one. But then after a series of men, it would be about a month's time before they would turn me off. And it would probably be because what I understand now is at the time of my menstrual cycle, all my channels kind of opened up to have a bigger awareness. And I used to have severe mood swings at that time, and it was probably just because I couldn't ignore the fact that there was a lot there that I had been ignoring in the relationship that wasn't ideal. And so I would just be turned off immediately in about a month's time, going from thinking it was the one, being so in love and infatuated, to I can't even stand the way this person breathes. This is over. And then I did a bunch of those, and then noticed the pattern in that and said, okay, well, I keep doing this. It can't be them. It's got to be me. So then I, withdrew again and started looking within myself. And at that time, I ended up getting really sick and had to heal myself from physical ailments. My liver was failing. And it put me in the hospital, and the doctors, had me on medications and things like this, and they were causing me more problems, and it wasn't helping, then I would get more symptoms, and then the doctor would say, well, that's for something else, you got to go to a different doctor for that. Then that doctor would give me contradicting information to what the first doctor gave me, and they really painted it like a dire situation for me, that my liver was failing, that I needed to be on a list for people who donated livers, so that because I may need a transplant, because my liver was just completely working against me. It was autoimmune hepatitis that they diagnosed me with, so they gave me the impression that my liver was working against me and that I would need a new liver. And they had me on some steroids and things, but those steroids, they were just making me feel terrible, way worse than I had been feeling. So I was pushed to this place of frustration and desperation, and it felt like if I wanted to live, I was going to have to figure something else out. And I ended up seeing the documentary Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, where the gentleman travels the United States, I believe, yes, the United States, juice fasting, meaning only drinking fresh, juiced vegetables. And maybe he had some fruit in there, I'm not sure, but I think it was predominantly vegetables. And in 60 days, he healed his autoimmune disorder. And his was different than mine as far as autoimmune disorders, but it gave me something to try, because I was really miserable. And I ended up getting a juicer. Actually, my sister had one gifted to her, and she let me borrow it, I believe. And I later ended up buying it off of her, but I got all the vegetables and I just started juice fasting. And later I added in colonics, like I would do, coffee enemas, because I just did more and more research about how you can clean out your system, and how because I was suffering from obesity as well, how processed food was really causing me issues, and how I had been starving my body cellularly. Even though I was eating processed foods, they were not providing my body with the nutrients it needed. And, in my family line, my DNA had adapted in such a way that in order to protect itself from processed foods, which my family was inclined to utilize, it would form fat cells around the toxins in those foods. So I had a lot of weight, which was making my life harder as well. And so this juice fast caused me to lose weight, which eventually taxed my liver so much that I had to stop, because my liver was now processing all those toxins that my fat cells had been storing, and it was just happening at too much of a rapid rate. So I had to stop that juice fast, but then in a few months or a month later or something like that, I did it again. And then I would just keep doing a juice fast every once in a while, and I noticed the difference. I noticed the difference in my thinking, how clear my thinking became, and how much better I felt. And how different the processed foods even tasted after I had cleansed my palate. And I understood how cravings were disappearing when I fed myself the nutrients that my body needed. And so from there, not only did my physical health start to improve, but I understood that there was more to life than I had been led to believe, that I had been shown to put so much trust in doctors and other people outside of myself that supposedly knew better for me. And whereas their methods were about making me feel like I was going to die, my methods that I had found through random watching Netflix was healing me. And so I started continuing on. I had also watched the documentary The Secret, which talked about the law of attraction. So it coincided with my healing from this physical ailment, that I was also practicing with the idea that my thoughts create my reality. Now, from this standpoint, I understand that there's a lot more to that law of the universe to understand than just that. And some people criticize that documentary because it didn't give all the information, and it may have given false hope and may even have thrown people off their trajectory or track. But I don't think that's possible, and I consider it one of the documentaries that saved my life, because in looking at the concept of thoughts create reality, I looked at my own thoughts, and I realized that all of my thoughts at that time had been negative, and my life was very negative. So it gave me reason to wrestle my thoughts and start looking at my thoughts for if they're true or not, and seeing what the opposite was. And I did that for each thought. And since I had been not leaving my house and in full-on anxiety, agoraphobia even, I just had plenty of time to do this, and that's what I would spend my days doing, is looking at my thoughts and turning them around in my mind. And some of them were easier to go. I could just convince myself that the opposite was also true, so it was useless to continue thinking that. And some were more stuck, and they would come back around, and so I noticed some of the loops in my thinking. So if you've caught on by now, what I'm alluding to is patterns, that my mind started noticing patterns. And when I could pick up on patterns, that was something that I now know is a big clue to things that we can put some focus on to further understand and free ourselves from. So that's what I was doing with each thought, and especially the ones that would repeat would need further inquiry and to be dissected even more and kind of focused on a bit more to be more fully understood. And it was also a matter of understanding why I was thinking some of the things I was thinking, validating for myself and accepting that those were the ways I was thinking. And once I was able to be present with emotions, that changed things even further. But in the beginning, it was mostly just changing thoughts. So sometimes it would be like I'd discover I had a coping mechanism that wasn't so good, and I would switch it over to an opposite extreme. And so later I would have to then deal with that thing again. So I learned a lot about going from one end of the scale to the other, and realized that what frees me from those energies, what frees a human being from the energies they're experiencing on repeat, is to balance out the energy, meaning find the middle ground, meaning accept that both things are true about the energy. So as I got better and started questioning life in general, because most of the things that I had been told about life and how things worked were now being shown to me as not true. And one of the things was that because of my struggles and trauma, dealing with the energies that were lodged in me to understand, and the coping mechanisms I had adopted for dealing with the traumas from childhood, and the traumas are the things where I decided that I wasn't loved, things like that. I had lost custody of my children. I had lost a custody battle, you could call it, but it was 6 years long, and it was horrid. And before that, the reason for being alive for me was that I was a mother. I hadn't planned on it, but I had fallen into it when I got into my very first relationship with my first boyfriend and stayed with him 6 years and had 3 children. And he was someone who would cope through narcissism and also alcoholism. And so there were some very harsh lessons through that whole process. Even though he had been sober when I first had a child with him, he soon returned back to drinking. And I'm not going to go into details because I believe I have in other videos, but I went through a lot of things such as homelessness, losing job after job, losing my job of 8 years when he was cheating on me, and blah, 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 blah. So anyway, ultimately, eventually, not without much struggle and much trying to avoid by living within the, realm of society, and I ended up losing custody of my children to their father, which was a horrid experience. So one of the things about what my beliefs were and what I found to be not true was that, there was a stigma against me, and generally by society, because I was a mother without custody of her children. So that came with a stigma, and in the beginning there was much embarrassment, and I knew people wouldn't understand like the whole process of what had happened, and they would just think bad of me. And in the beginning, since I was a people pleaser still, that was horrible. I didn't want people to dislike me or judge me or think I was bad or wrong or, not value me, because that would be the end of the love that I would need from them and that I was getting from them. So this all caused me to have to kind of untangle and question whether or not these things were really true. And so I did, and I had to say, well, if I am a valuable person here on earth, I'm going to have to disagree with what generally people say in the public about people like me. So I just started questioning everything after that. It was like, and I found reasons why each thing wasn't true. And, of course, on the one hand it is true, and on the other hand it isn't true. And so both things were true. And so I just started untangling all the things that didn't feel good, for me to believe about me anymore. And in the process of doing so, I felt better and better, and I got better and better, and my health improved better and better, and I lost weight. And I really got connected to what I would call God, but it could be called like source or energy, or just the energy that creates all. And as I did this, I felt like I was getting messages, and I'm not saying like I heard voices or anything like that, although that has happened once or twice. It was more that I was just getting like knowings, like all of a sudden I would know something, and then I would experiment with it, and it was true. And it was things like I can dissipate clouds with my mind. I can ask insects to leave my house by showing them the way with my mind. I can have conversations with nature, with animals, with trees. I can assist people's bodies to heal injuries, like a toe that may have been broken but was definitely black and blue, like a kidney that's tube didn't form fully, a dog that had pulled all his ligaments. I could help him get into a comfortable state and then heal within 3 months after perpetuating that energy healing for him. And I was just doing all kinds of experimentation with energy, with thought, with belief. And one of the beliefs that I adopted was that love is the most powerful thing, and that love can heal anything. And I was doing so much with love, it was just that I had faith and I understood, and my vitality came back and my body came back. And I was definitely not having a great time with my family, who were still coping in those older ways. They were kind of clashing with me in a lot of ways and not really liking what I had to say, because I was so excited to share it with them all. So that was a difficult thing for me, because I had to see that, even though this great ability existed, that not everybody wanted to utilize it, that it was actually not something that other people were going to necessarily get excited about with me. And that was hard, because I didn't understand. I couldn't understand for a very long time, not like the way I do now. Now I can kind of understand that everyone has their process, and everybody's here to learn something different, and their perspective matters, and their own finding their own way matters. And that I could be who I am, and it may inspire others to be who they are too. And that was my role, and that was the best I could do with influencing others, if that's what I wanted to do. But what I wanted to do was actually save others from the suffering that I perceived them to be in, because I had been in. when really, I found my way out, so I know they can find their way out, and if they need my help, they will ask. So I found a lot along the way, but what eventually happened was I needed to go out into the real world again, after being in isolation so long, and then perfecting like the understanding that love can heal all. I had to go out and test that. It was like God or universe kind of pushed me out by showing me. They would give me words in my mind that would lead to me to research something, or concepts, and I would be doing astrology this way, and they would show me mythologies to look up and study a bit, and then I would see essences of those astrologies playing out in my real life, and then they would show me in the astrology chart where that was. So I got the idea that now I was clearing karmic patterns. So these were patterns, because if it was energy that was affecting others and it was coming through the astrology, through the planets and asteroids, then I knew it was something that was playing out on Earth since the times when the gods actually lived it. And some of these stories are repeating at different eras, over and over again, and you just see different characters playing out the same kind of stories. So again, it was like patterns that I was noticing, and what I was realizing in the beginning was that since love could heal anything, what I wanted to do most of all was heal narcissism, because everyone I loved was kind of suffering from the effects of narcissistic coping mechanisms. And narcissistic coping mechanisms is just like what my family had been doing, whereas like my mom was a people pleaser. She was selfless, and she didn't put herself into the equation, and she gave love in order to get love. So it didn't really like factor in what the other person felt. It was just like what you could, like people pleasers just do it for what they can get out of the other person, which is appreciation. And you could tell when this was happening, because you can notice a pattern with people pleasers. Sometimes you'll see that if you don't appreciate what they do, they get mad, they get resentful. They could even lash out and tell you. Like you could even hear your parents say, I did this, this, and this for you, and this is what you do to repay me. And it's like, well, they're giving with expectation. That's narcissistic. That you're not taking into consideration what the other person feels or thinks. And so there can also be the overt narcissism, which is somebody who overtly doesn't take into consideration how you think or feel. And that would have been more like my father's way. But like, these are kind of subtle things that have kind of settled into our society and culture as somewhat normal, because it kind of just spread, right? Because we just learned from our parents and it gets passed down. And I'm not saying everyone deals in this way, but maybe everyone has a little bit of it, and maybe it's on a scale, right? Like it's like some people have it a little and some people do it outright, and some it's more subtle. And even the idea of retaliation and projection and all of that seems narcissistic to me, because, you're putting your own thoughts and feelings onto somebody else, and you're not considering how they feel. So that's pretty selfish, and that's pretty like self-centered, and it's not self-centered from a loving way, right? So these are, I'm limited by terminology, and I'm also open to using different terminology for these concepts altogether going forward, because it seems like the old language also limits us to the old ways of being in the old story. And where I've eventually found myself after my travels is that I have the understanding that what I am doing is laying new foundation for me to live in such a way that does not limit me and does not perpetuate me living in those ways, any of those ways. And that has involved even changing the language that I have. So I was sent into really dark places as a way to really learn about what else I had in me, that I had to see. It's like, so whatever we see outside of ourselves is really inside us. And when we talk about projection and things like that, it's like, even I have been doing that, right? Like I'm doing that all the time. And that's why when I understood that anything I see outside of myself, I could find inside myself, I used that to help myself heal. And I knew that love was the thing that healed, so all I had to do was find the thing I saw outside of me, inside of me, and then love it. And that became my journey when I was pushed out of my, hermit mode into the world again. I saw lots of things, whether it was me trying to save someone from their own self-sabotage and suffering, I had to find that within me, and I had to love that in me. Or if it was me trying to tell somebody the way to live, I had to find that in that wound in me of when someone did that to me. And, as I loved these parts of myself, the pain that I had been avoiding to feel by doing those things was fully accepted and integrated into me, so that I didn't have to do those things to avoid feeling that pain anymore. So those patterns and coping mechanisms fell away. And as they did, the filter that they had over my view of life also fell away. And so my awareness of life grew and grew and grew as I integrated more and more things. And of course, on the earlier days, it was that my coping mechanisms crumbled for me. And then I saw bigger, and I was forced into a corner where I couldn't cope and do it the way I was told, so I had to find another way. But there are certain level of things now that it's like I have been coping in that manner. So it's a little bit more difficult sometimes for me to see these more subtle things, or things that have been working efficiently, or things that like everybody's been doing. So that's the kind of stuff I've been working through now, is like the deepest stuff. But I have always understood and known that love is the answer. Love will always come out on top. So when I recognized in myself right away that there was jealousy or manipulation or envy or retaliation, I would love the parts of myself that felt those ways, and I would be present with those. So I integrated it. So I stopped having to do those things as soon as I noticed the patterns in me of doing them. And from then on, it was just that those things couldn't hurt me anymore. Those things didn't affect me anymore. I was operating in a place above those, having loved those things and having also understood why those things existed. So it's like, if somebody were to do something towards me in those realms, it could only hurt me when I was a match to it, right? And once I was not a match to it, because I fully understood why it was there, how it affected people, and how I was still lovable even though I did those things, I knew that the other person was all that too. The other person had a reason they were doing it, they were trying to avoid a certain way to feel, and that they were still lovable even though they did those things. So this is how I just went through life, operating in such a way that every discomfort, every pattern, every thing that seemed unlovable, I would just love it. And it was just possible for me. But this is what alchemy is, right? It's like, that's how I turned lead to gold, like, and in terms of emotions, in terms of dense energy, in terms of things that would limit me, in terms of like things that were limiting my view. Like no matter what was happening, as long as I loved the part of me who was experiencing it, I came through it. And having that as a rule has been so life-changing and so beautiful. And there were definitely moments where I wondered, like really, is love strong enough, to get me through this? But it, without fail, every time, love was strong enough to get me through this. Love always got me through this, because I am creating my own reality, and everything that is shown to me is something for me to learn from. And so what I've learned is that love allows me to accept and be present with whatever is. And as long as I can be present with what is, then I don't have to develop a pattern of coping to avoid feeling that thing. And the patterns of coping to avoid feeling things is what keeps people so busy in the hustle and bustle and the running around trying to do this and that, and reacting without being present, reacting without thinking, reacting without thinking about how somebody else feels or how they'll be affected. So it eliminates narcissism, this presence. So what a beautiful thing, it really has proven to be the most powerful thing that I have ever encountered and that I have ever been. And to, before I went into the dark places, out of my isolation to test it out, I believed it and knew it. And going through the dark, there were moments that, I knew that was like the thing that I had to do, but I couldn't remember how it felt to be so open-hearted and to be so in love with life. So it was just like I was utilizing my knowledge to perform the acts that I needed to do. But it was sometimes coming so hard and fast that I would not have a moment to like get back to the place where I could open my heart. So every once in a while, I needed to do that for myself, right? Like step out of the fray of processing and integrating some of the karmas that I had looping in my energy still, so that I could get back to the place where I remembered what it feels like to be love, right? That I could kind of jump up to the place where it was like, oh yeah, I'm not separate. I'm not separate from any of these things. These are just part of me, and they're waiting to be collected and loved by me. Even the darkest part of any woman, is lovable. When you look at the mythology of Lilith, she was excluded. She took revenge. She was in a lot of pain from being excluded. She started a war in some of the mythologies by throwing the apple to the most beautiful one. She was a mistress. She was a murderer. She was someone who didn't care to be integrated into society. But she was also very powerful, and she was also someone who didn't want to lay down to Adam. She didn't want to sacrifice herself. She didn't need to do anything to get love from other people. So even though she did have her own shadows to clean up, because if you're retaliating and doing things like that, then that shows a lack of being present, right? Like there are painful things that she had to encounter, but you can see how it's possible to live in this state where you don't live for the approval of others, and that it's a quite freeing way to be, and that she had an advantage in a way because she was only with herself, so she only got to see herself. And Lilith, I would say, has the best opportunity to alchemize everything that she has experienced up into the high. Being viewed as the bad mother who lost custody of her children, and being viewed as maybe like a man-eater, like a heartbreaker, where I would, in my younger years, date men and then just, be done or turned off or whatever, but also be powerful and be excluded and in different degrees, and integrated a lot of the Lilith mythology where she could be feared, and that people could fear being viewed as her. And like, I don't fear that at all, because I've been in all those positions, and I've understood that, I was like this, I felt like I was a victim. I didn't know I was powerful. I was just so benign and pure, and like didn't even like, the fact that people would be scared of me, to me was like, what on earth? Like, don't you know that I need you to love me? Like, it was like that to me, I was really, really innocent and pure, and being viewed like this. And then eventually I had to like love the part of me that feared being viewed like that, because I noticed the pattern of it. I was like, I would get hurt every time someone would say, oh, I don't want to mess with you. And I would be like, well, what does this person even mean? Like I'm the most like benign person who doesn't want to hurt anyone, and the only time I've ever hurt anyone is when lashing out in rage, which was just my suppressed disempowerment, which I worked, which I worked through, and now, I don't have those kind of reactions anymore. So by collecting the pieces of all those darker parts of women that get ostracized, pushed away, judged, stigmatized, and are perceived as unlovable, there's a new way to live. There's a new way to live with, like, it's like knowing how powerful you are, because knowing you can be on your own, and knowing that you don't have to take revenge because you've already been down that road. You understand what that does. It's like it always come back to you. Taking revenge out on somebody, it always comes back to you, because this is a beautiful place where we're creating our own reality and we're experiencing our own energy. So if if you perpetuate it out, it will come back, and it's a beautiful thing. It's like something you can count on. So then you go into a new timeline with the fuller picture, with like, oh, okay, so I don't want to perpetuate that, and even when I'm viewed this way, I can just be me, be the whole version of me, and eventually, maybe, if they want to, people will understand, and if they don't, I'll be okay too, because I've already been okay. Yeah, seeing the truth of things, like showing the truth of things that the darkest of dark is not even dark, it's just a misunderstanding. Just because someone isn't fully understood, there's mystery here, does not make them bad. That this is all energy waiting to be balanced out and understood. That is simply what everything is, even the darkest of dark. Even a murdering mother. Even a murdering mother has a reason in her own perspective of why she's doing that thing. And the truth of the matter is by projecting onto that person, oh, she's bad, oh, she's wrong, we are actually putting our own judgment on this person without understanding how they think or feel. It's narcissism. Now, instead, what we could say is, oh, I have a judgment. I have a perception of what that person's doing. This perception is in me. I have a way to feel. I feel angry. I feel hurt. Well, it's my anger and my hurt. I'm the one who has to be with it. I can't, if I project it onto them, I'm starting a war, and I'm never going to stop that war by doing that. The war will always perpetuate in a loop until someone takes it back within themselves, removes the focus from outside, removes the fear of feeling how they feel. And one thing that we've done in our parenting is punishment and reward, and it causes people to think that it's terrible to be wrong because you can get punished. In actuality, being wrong is how we learn. We have to be allowed to make mistakes. We have to be allowed to trial and error and experiment our way through. And if we adopt this perfectionism as a way to cope, we're going to be stuck in loops of trying to do the right thing and probably even pretending that we're not wrong even when we are. So anything done in a pattern is waiting for the truth to be understood and for the energy to be balanced out by first being present with the uncomfortable feeling, accepting it exists, thereby collecting a new part of yourself and moving forward into a new possibility with the bigger understanding that has been gained. This is how we walk into this new age, I guess you could say, of Aquarius. And I guess like that word new age has a kind of negative connotations in some people's eyes, so I don't want to confuse anybody, so I'm not referring necessarily to that, although you could apply that if that makes sense for you. But what Aquarius is the forward thinking energy. It's the humanitarian. It's the one that takes all into consideration. So the Aquarius is looking for the win-win-win, meaning the Aquarius is not going to go forward by projecting onto somebody else the thoughts and feelings without considering how they feel. Everybody needs to be considered. Anything built on something where somebody loses out is not going to sustain in this new way that we're living, in this new timeline. And anything that is out of balance is not of the new timeline, and it's simply being relived. It's simply a pattern. And if somebody wants to keep living those patterns, that's their choice. Maybe they have something more to learn from them. But I can safely say that all those patterns have been learned from already. So if you feel like you don't need to be in that energy anymore, and you want to get out, know that you can get out. That you use your presence, use your acceptance, use the ability to balance out energy, use your ability to understand there's always more to know. We don't know it all, and there are limitless possibilities. So this can become like a playground, right? Where we go forward, relating to each other with the innocence of a child, right? Imagine if you hadn't been programmed by your environment. And imagine if you're a child, you're going into the experience with curiosity. You don't have expectations of how someone needs to be. Like I'm not going to give to somebody expecting that they need to give back. And I don't have attachment to the outcome, meaning I'm going to give to them and then they're going to, be my friend forever. It's like, no, you actually are having an experience with this person, and the experience is here for you to enjoy in the present moment, because we're not trying to perpetuate loops. We're not trying to create karma. That's what expectations and attachment to outcome will start. And people are always changing and growing. So can we really safely attach an expectation to them? No, because we're not them, and we don't know the trajectory of their growth. And can we really safely attach an outcome that we prefer to a situation? Well, it's risky. If we want to avoid being disappointed, then we may want to remain present and open and curious and self-loving and accepting of what is. What we resist persists. So if we want to change something, to resist it is never going to work. What we have to do is replace it with something that we prefer. So put our focus towards what we prefer. If we know a certain system in our culture or a community or a society isn't working, then we create one that works, and we simply put our focus there. There's no need to put a destructive force on the old system anymore if we provide a system that actually replaces it efficiently, effectively, and fairly, meaning is the win-win-win, because it will sustain that way. Now this is all part of an evolution that we've been going through, so this isn't to demonize or say that we've been doing it wrong, right? We know what we know because we've been through what we've been through. So it was never wrong. It's just that this is the time of an invitation to do it a different way. And so that's what I've come through, is being in the innocence of a child, approaching things with curiosity, and being present through experiences that we have is a beautiful way to be in love, to be love, and to not perpetuate the need to cope and things like that. So if something shocking happens while we're in that state, we are present with the discomfort. We are present with a fear that may arise. We are present with sadness, with grief, with happiness, with joy, with surprise, with laughter, with humility, when we are shown a piece of our ego that is still coping, it's a beautiful, beautiful gift, and we are present with it. And there's no shame or blame, because we've already disassembled and understood that it's okay to learn through growing and through making mistakes or through learning more and to know more than we knew yesterday. It's a natural, beautiful process, and it doesn't require us to be shamed when we expand our knowledge and awareness to a bigger place. Nothing's gone wrong. If we've played out some of the old energies because we needed to play it out so that we knew what we were going to do in this lifetime, that is a beautiful thing. Take what we learned from it and go forward, and know that this premise of being willing to invest in the win-win-win is what can be sustained long term, and is what will be ultimately fulfilling, and is what will stop the perpetuation of suffering amongst our human race. So that's what I've learned. That's what I've learned in my journey. And gosh, I'm so thankful for it. I'm so thankful for it. And I'm so thankful for what else I have to learn. You know, I know that I don't know everything. I don't know what I don't know. And I'm so thankful for all the people along the way who were able to share their knowledge, their experiences, who inspired me to do my own experimentation with the knowledge that they shared. I am so thankful for everybody that played their part for me to figure out what was going on with me so that I could learn from my own experiences that I was having. Oh, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm honored to be a part of it, and I honor you and the role that you have played at this time on Earth through this evolution that we are all invited to. Okay, I'm going to end it there. Thank you.